Hi BookTube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Today I'll be wrapping up everything that I read in the month of June, and then I will go through some of my reading plans for July. June was a pretty good reading month. I read a fair bit. I finished 8 books, I believe, which is certainly more than I aim for, so that's good. And I enjoyed a lot of what I read. You've probably heard me talk about most of these books since I haven't finished much since the last reading update that I made about a couple of weeks ago. So the first half of the video, it might go quite quickly, or it may be that I find new things to say, but I'll go through them all just to be a completist. So the first book that I finished was The Complete Poems of Elizabeth Bishop. Really, most of this had been read in May, and I literally just finished the last few pages on the 1st of June. But to be a completist, I did finish The Complete Poems of Elizabeth Bishop, and I've talked a fair bit about it. The best place to go would be the Poetry Thursday video that I made about it if you want to get a taste of how my relationship to Elizabeth Bishop has changed, and what some of my favourite Elizabeth Bishop poems are. After that, I finished Balthazar by Laurence Durrell. I've been making my way through the Alexandria Quartet, and this is the second of them. And again, I've gone through a fair bit about how the quartet works, how this fits into it. So I don't want to repeat myself too much. But I will, I think, once I've finished the whole quartet, I'm feeling like I'd quite like to make a video about the quartet as a whole, just go through how the 4 books fit together, some of my favourite moments, what I think the strengths and weaknesses of each part may be, and kind of see where it goes. So I won't go into too much detail about it, at least for this one, because I've talked a fair bit about that. Then next up, again, one I don't want to talk about too much. It's the pillow book of, say, Shōnagon. Again, I've sort of said at least as much as I want to say for now about this. It's really fascinating. I definitely recommend it if you're sort of curious to know what medieval Japan was like. And certainly for me, I was curious, and I'd say it didn't really let me down. There was a lot here that I had just no idea about before reading it, particularly how they have a essentially like a caste system, or like a tiered ranking system for cats and dogs. And if the dog, I'm saying dog because there's one particular story about a dog that's quite traumatic. But if a dog isn't behaving um, in the way that's expected for its station, for its rank, it's thrown out of the palace. So just sort of weird sort of quirks like that. I had no idea, but it was really entertaining and really interesting. Then after that, I read A Time to Keep Silence by Patrick Leigh Fermor. Again, this is one I mentioned in the random reading update a fair bit. It's essentially about 3 visits to 3 different monasteries, and he's just going through his experiences there, and also sort of, I suppose, investigating his own feelings towards them, what it's like for an outsider to inhabit these spaces, because it seems so different for someone who maybe has sort of taken the calling, as it were. So a really fascinating little book, and for fans of Patrick Leigh Fermor, it's just a nice little dose of his sort of just lovely, energetic, lively writing style. Another one I mentioned in the update was Dune by Frank Herbert. I read this for Dune in June, which is headed up by Aaron Hook and Shaun Standfast. I know Debs from Raina read stuff as well. I think she was an official host as well, and so they were making videos every week, going through sort of different details of the book. But it was my first time, and I really enjoyed it. I will definitely go on and read more of the Dune books as they go on. Then after that, then I think that's the book that I couldn't show you. There's one book here that is in the other room where my daughter is sleeping, so don't particularly want to disturb her just to get a book. But that was Under Western Eyes by Joseph Conrad, which again I really loved, and again I think I went on a bit of a ramble about that book in the reading update. So again, you can refer back to that. And then, if I'm remembering correctly, there are 2 books that I have finished since then. The first of which, again, I rambled on a fair bit about, but I might have a bit more to say about it. But it's From the Holy Mountain by William Dalrymple, and it's a sort of travel history sort of thing. Essentially, he came across this book by a Byzantine monk, and it's called I think it's called The Spiritual Meadow by a guy called John Moskos, and it's essentially just a I don't know, a kind of just account of what it was like in various monasteries in around the Mediterranean and the Near East in, I don't know, about 1,000 years ago, maybe 1,200 years ago. Can't remember exactly when he was writing. And back when that sort of whole sort of area was part of the Byzantine Empire, and so it was a very different world back then. And so William Dalrymple has decided to sort of go on some trips and visit maybe some of the last vestiges of that world. So again, lots of visiting monasteries and sort of small Christian communities in in Turkey and Lebanon and the West Bank and Egypt, and but also not those communities, also some of the people sort of living around them as well. And it was written in the mid-90s, so that part of the world has changed a lot. It was pretty bad then, and it's pretty bad now. And so there are always storm clouds on the horizon as you're reading it, like Patrick Leigh Fermor, and quite like Laurence Durrell as well. There's a just lovely springiness to the way that Dalrymple writes, and so it always feels lovely to be reading it. And then you find that what you're reading about is really, it's just pretty brutal places. I would recommend it if you're interested in that part of the world, if you're interested in Byzantine history and sort of what's left of it, because for a lot of quite understandable reasons, it's not necessarily history that's often looked into that much by a lot of the people in that part of the world. There are still people who would, but they're certainly in the minority. So yeah, very interesting little book. And a nice segue is that in From the Holy Mountain, Dalrymple visits Alexandria, and when he's there, he pulls out of his bag a copy of the Alexandria Quartet, and he sort of just reads that and sort of basks in it while he's visiting Alexandria, and then he meets sort of some of the remaining Greek community who are slowly dying out as he was writing, and he's kind of comparing what some of the characters were like in the book to what they're like, and also some of the people he's meeting actually met Laurence Durrell. Some of them met C.P. Cavafy, the great poet from Alexandria, who is kind of haunting the whole Alexandria Quartet. So it was quite nice then to have these 2 books that I was reading, these 2 works to be sort of flowing into each other, And one thing I found interesting was, I said before when discussing the Alexandria Quartet, that the Alexandria in the novels is very much the Alexandria of Laurence Durrell's imagination, and yet a lot of at least the Greek population that was still left, because the city's changed so much in their lifetime, and at least for them, the Alexandria in his books is, to them, it is kind of quite accurate, or there are elements of it that are accurate. And so when they have that nostalgia, his books are somewhere to go for them to go and visit the city that has changed so much. So I found that quite touching and quite interesting. And so then I went on and read Mountolive, which is the third in the quartet. And this is quite different from the others. Again, I don't want to go on too long of a rant about it, because I might try and make a video about the whole quartet. But the other two were very much first person, and there are bits where I suppose the idea is that the person who's supposed to have written the book in the book, if that makes sense, has he's pulled together all these sources for certain events, and then he's written it as if it's third person, and yet you sort of have to remember that the person writing it, or the narrator, is very much a character in the book as well, and so it's always going to be tainted a little bit. Whereas this is more of a traditional third person, realist, more objective kind of novel, and yet it still very much feels like Laurence Durrell. Still feels like his own. It feels like part of the quartet, and yet the style is quite different. So that was really interesting. The story is really interesting. Having sort of taking this more objective view of everything that's going on in these books, you kind of move away of some of the personal elements of the book, and you see what's been going on in the background, sort of politically, and what some of the characters are doing, some sort of quite illegal stuff, which it was really interesting to see that, but also for the main character in here, all of this, all the politics, all of the sort of legal stuff going on. There's a huge tension between that and his own personal life with some of the characters we've already met. So it was really quite touching, and I quite enjoyed it. And it felt like the quartet at that point was sort of taking a deep breath and sort of collecting itself before it could move on. So I really enjoyed that. And that's everything that I finished in June. I have been listening to an audiobook as well. It's called The Bright Book of Life by Harold Bloom. It's quite similar to his book How to Read and Why, except this is entirely devoted to novels, and it's just a long list of many of his favourite novels, many of the novels that he's gone back to throughout his life. And as he was nearing the end of his life, as he was writing this book, it is very much him measuring up what these books mean to him, sort of so close to his deathbed. And so it kind of feels like he's having a conversation with all these ghosts around him. So again, it's quite touching. But I've been listening on Spotify, and at least here in the UK, they for sort of people who are sort of subscribers to Spotify, you get a certain amount of free hours for audiobooks, and then once you've used up those hours, you can pay to sort of top up, or you can wait until the next month. So I've sort of had to stop about 2/3 of the way through this, and I think now that we're in July, I'll be able to carry on at some point. And I was partway through a chapter on the Magic Mountain as well, so I might go back to the beginning of that chapter when I try again. And then very quickly, I'll try to go through what I want to read in July. So kind of goes without saying that to finish off the Alexandria Quartet, I'll be reading Clea. I'm already a good chunk of the way through, about 100 pages through, so yeah, sort of nearing about a third of the way through this. And again, I'm very much enjoying it, and I'm sure I'll have more to say a little later on. Then I've picked up Dante again, and I'm going to try and read Paradise in July, and it will very likely spill over into August, but I don't want to rush it. But yeah, it's been good to be back with Dante. And still reading Emily Dickinson as well. As I said, I think the last time I was talking about Emily Dickinson, I might need to take a little break once I get to about halfway through. But every time I pick it up, there's always at least one poem that really stands out and really speaks to me. So there's going to be a lot of asterisks in here, as you know, when I flick through in the future, which is nice to think about. And then if I finish any of those, or maybe if I don't, if I feel like juggling a lot of books, there are a few other books here that I'd like to try. There's the Voronezh Notebooks by Osip Mandelstam, a Russian poet, sort of symbolist poet, I think, who was eventually arrested and shot by the Soviets. And apparently this is some of his most interesting work. It's not a parallel translation, which is good because I have no idea what goes on when it comes to Cyrillic. In other languages, I always find it interesting to have a parallel translation, but it would be a bit pointless in that case. And then if I'm reading that as a sort of respite from Emily Dickinson, I might pick up this next one as well to sort of just take a deeper breath and get a bit more variety. And I might get around to reading On the Nature of the Universe by Lucretius, which is, yeah, a little older than Osip Mandelstam and Emily Dickinson. Once I'm done with the Alexandria Quartet, I think I'd quite like to give The Fraud by Zadie Smith a go. It's been sitting around for a little bit. I picked it up from a little free library at work, so it'll be nice to see if I enjoy it, and if it's not something I enjoy or not something I feel like I need to reread, then I might put it back. And then throughout this month and next month, Classics and Company are going to be reading The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, and I really couldn't bring myself to reread it so close to the last time I reread it. But I wanted to read something by Thomas Mann, so I'll be reading his new selected stories. This has got Death in Venice in it, which is probably his most famous story, and it's got a few others in here as well. It's got Chaotic World and Childhood Sorrow, which sounds great. A Day in the Life of Hanno Buddenbrook, which I think is the last chapter from Buddenbrook, I think, but it kind of works as its own story, I think. But I haven't read Buddenbrooks, so I couldn't tell you. There's Louise, and there's also Confessions of a Con Artist by Felix Krull, Part 1, My Childhood. I'm very intrigued that there's only Part 1 in there, and you know, is there a Part 2 that the editor here decided not to include, or is it that Thomas Mann only ever wrote Part 1? So I'll be intrigued to find out. But as you can guess, that they're not the shortest short stories, since there's only 5 or 6 in there. And then earlier in the year, I think I agreed to read some James Baldwin with Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics, and I sort of just remembered at the beginning of the month that's something we said we'd do. I'm not entirely sure if he's remembered or not. Often when I forget about buddy reads, I kind of assume that my buddy reader has also forgotten, but I have asked him, and so if he's remembered and if he's still got space, then we'll be reading Going to Meet the Man, so some more short stories. But yeah, I'll see how it goes and see what Alan wants to do. But that's it. That's everything I read in June and my plans as they stand at the moment for July. One thing I did want to say before finishing was really just to, I suppose, comment on the fact that we lost Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. I'm sure most of you who watch my channel have probably come across her channel, and I suppose really I just didn't want to sort of let things keep going on as normal before addressing it, and before I suppose just I don't know, sort of just letting Jim, her husband, and everybody know that I'm sort of thinking of them, and yeah, it was a shock, and I just didn't want to let things keep going on without addressing it. Since this is the first video I've been able to record since finding out, so yeah, it'll be strange without Alice around, and yeah, my thoughts are with her family, and with any of you who who watched her videos and enjoyed what she brought to BookTube, and will be missing her. So sorry to end on a sad note, but yeah, just wanted to make sure that I didn't leave it out. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.